So welcome Phil to your GR Yaris engine strip down. I thought I'll get this on video so you can see how we disassemble all the engines and how we package them and make sure everything's correct with the engine before we go ahead and actually modify it. So this GR Yaris engine, Phil, thank you very much for choosing us again to do a engine build, turbo kit, fuel system, and basically try and give you 400 wheel horsepower in a really nice package.
Whoa. Hold on a minute. I'm going to strip the engine, but first of all, we need to remove the engine from the car. And I did get this all on video on my GoPro with a nice big time lapse, put it in my computer, and my memory card went corrupted. So, sorry Phil, didn't get that bit, removing the engine from the car. But let's get back on to stripping and the ultimate guide about the GR Yaris and Corolla engine.
So I'm going to strip it, and then we're going to build it. And let's get on with the stripping. The first thing I really need to do is to remove the rocker cover. I want to get the rocker cover off, all the sensors, all of the front of the engine stripped, cam chain off and all of that, so that I can then take the cylinder head off and wrap everything all up as we go. So we might as well get on and start cracking on with this. Got lots of sandwich bags and a marker pen, and let's do it. So I'm going to use a gun just to pull most of these out. There's quite a few bolts that hold these rocker covers on, but they've actually got a spray bar built internally into the plastic cover to lubricate all the valve train, which I think is a really cool idea with the GR engines. Got two spray bars actually that run across internally. So whoever is going to make a billet cover for one of these, need to incorporate that as well into the cover. Without that lubrication on the top, then all the rollers are going to run dry and it's not going to be great for the valve train. So let's just get all of these out, and then we need to remove both of the cam sensors, because that gets held down with a post underneath the cover, and then it should be a matter of a little dink. That is our valve cover off of the engine. And so the spray bars are actually here. There is a channel that runs all the way around there, all the way around there, and then these rubber seals which go on top, so the oil actually gets fed all the way up into the cover and then distributed over the cover. Let's pull this gasket off. So we've got the top of the engine all exposed now. I'm actually going to do the vacuum pump first before I do all of this side. That's just because I want to take the vacuum pump off and put it in a bag. Now guys, if you are running a big power GR Yaris and you're taking it on track and you've got a sequential, I would highly recommend that you remove this vacuum pump off of the engine and take the drive lug from the back of the cam. If you think about it, the cam's only doing half engine speed, so at 8,000 this whole kind of valve train assembly and the vacuum pump's only going to be doing 4,000 RPM. But we have got a pump, this one here, which is driven off of the end of the cam, and if I just try and turn this over, there's quite a lot of resistance when you're buzzing the engine, when you're coming down a gear change or the sequential. You're going to be accelerating the engine quite quickly, and what happens is there is almost like a graphite tube slot in this pump, and when it starts to kind of accelerate and spin really quickly, they can shatter. And we've had it where they've actually broken the lugs off of the camshaft just because of the force it takes to spin this from, say, 1500 RPM to 8000. Yeah, there's a lot of resistance there, so I can see why they break. And obviously if you put thicker oil in the engine because the engine needs it for bigger power, this resistance in this pump gets a lot harder, and that's why they break. So yeah, it's a good thing to remove the drive spigot out of the pump and block off the end of the cam with a sequential, and then use the inlet manifold as your vacuum. But if you have anti-lag, like a lot of the cars do, you do lose the brake assist, the brake booster assist, because you're not pulling a vacuum with the engine anymore. You've actually got positive boost pressure on the inlet manifold, and obviously the servo assist won't work. So got to be careful with that as well. There's lots going on at the top of this engine. So we have our fuel pump, DI high pressure fuel pump. We have our chains, we have our VVTi, exhaust and inlet, our sensors, followers and rockers and rollers and shims, and yeah, there is a lot that is going on up here. Now what I found was when we were doing Christian's car and we were spinning it to like nearly 9,000 RPM, if you think of the load that's got to be transferred, so it comes driven from the crank up through the chain, it's pulling down on the chain this side to turn everything, and then you've got this massive load at the back, and it actually wears the cam chain guide way faster when you have got that vacuum pump on the valve train as well. It's just so much more load. So if you get rid of that, you can spin the whole engine, all the cams, everything way faster, and there's not that resistance on the exhaust cam. Every time you spin the engine, it's tightening up this chain here and on the guide. So yeah, I think it's a really worthwhile thing to delete that if you are running a sequential, spinning it fast. It's safer for the top of the engine, and the last thing that we want with any of these engines is valve train problems, because it will get extremely expensive, extremely fast if you have a valve train failure. Just going to pull the sensors out. These have thread lock on the threads on these 4 bolts because it is a through hole, and the oil can come up behind these threads, and they are the same sensors, but I want this engine going back together exactly how it come apart, so I will label them inlet and exhaust so that they can go back together in the correct orientation, so that the ECU knows what sensor is what. You do end up using lots of sandwich bags when you do it like this, and we've probably got 5,000 sandwich bags upstairs. Keeps everything in a nice organised state as you're stripping. So I'm going to take the side cover off next, and there are 2 more holes with thread lock on, which is that one and this one. So they have got thread lock on. Again, they are a through hole. I know where most of the nuts and bolts go on these engines now. There's no need to label them, but I will just top cover. So whenever I come to reassemble everything, it's just really easy. Lay the bags out, lay everything out, and yeah, then you can just piece it all together. So removing these top covers, they are quite tough, but you don't want to drive anything into the joint faces. These engines are sealed with most of the joint faces, so when you take them apart, don't be bashing screwdrivers into the joint faces. So these are the joint faces here, both sides. Yeah, if you go in with a screwdriver, you're going to put an indentation in it and a low spot and have oil leaks. So not advising going in with the screwdriver. Just pry them where the dowels are. I've already removed and undone my crank bolts, which get done up quite tight. So front pulley. The pulley will go with the engine for balancing, so that we can make sure that everything gets balanced. So now I'll do the lower cover. The lower cover has the oil pump built into the front of the cover. There is 1 bolt that has Loctite on, which is this one, and the rest of them do not. slightly shorter as well. The one in the middle for this bottom cover. Once we are stripping the engine, once we get to a point where the table's almost full, I then transfer all of that into plastic boxes which are named, again, to keep things organised. When you've got lots of cars and lots of things going on, it's really important to keep organised. You don't want to be losing anything. We can always build cars if we have the parts. If you haven't got the parts and they're missing because they've been sat in a loft or in a box, yeah, it does make it way more difficult to find it. So this is the front cover of the engine, or the lower cover, with the integrated oil pump in that cover. Now from Toyota UK, these are astronomically expensive. They are like £1,700–1,800 for this cover. So I will wrap all of this up and clean it before obviously it goes back on. But now I have the front of the engine exposed. Yeah, so the whole cam chain set up. We have a guide, a big like half moon shaped guide here on the left with the chain tensioner, a long solid fixed guide, and then our top guide as well. And yeah, it's going to be important to make sure this all gets timed up when it goes back together, and I'll run you through that. So now I'm at this stage, and again, bagging everything, keeping everything clean so that we can just clean it and then it goes back together again, and you're not left with not knowing where all the nuts and bolts go. This is the fuel pump bracket. This is the cam sensor bracket that's underneath the covers. I'll do chain guides. So these have a spacer underneath them. Sometimes when you lift them up, it pulls the spacers off and they fall in. They fall in the head. So again, there's something to watch when you're stripping. And then I put these nuts back on to make sure they don't come off. I'm going to actually crack off the 3 bolts on each VVTi part of this engine. You cannot do them with a gun. Undo these with a ratchet. They get done up to 14 foot-pounds. It doesn't seem tight, but if you gun them, it does strip the Allen bolts. I really enjoy these engines. I think they're a very good platform to work from for a 3-cylinder. Just going to spin off the tensioner. This will be oily. Now there are 2 dowel pins. Once you take the tensioner off, it will fully extend, and we have to reset this when we put the engine back together again. There is a ratchet mechanism and it's hydraulically operated. So chain is starting to become loose now. There you go, chain is nice and loose. Carry on buzzing off the guides. That is one guide there. We'll just inspect it to make sure it's okay. And it does look absolutely fine. There's no wear on it. There's nothing impregnated into the plastic that the chain runs on. And then we have our moving, which is there. This is the one that gets all the torque of the chain through it, and it wears here. And I've seen a couple of engines where these are broken, and the only thing I can put it down to is that damn vacuum pump on the engine, because you wouldn't normally see much load through the valve train components, but with the vacuum pump, yeah, you do. Our chain with our coloured links. So front of the engine is already stripped. Now I'm going to take the cams out of this. First of all, I just need to crack off all of these. Get done up to 15 foot-pounds when it goes back together again. So once I've cracked them off, I can spin them off with the gun. You can't take the vacuum pump bracket off before you take the cams out, because there's not enough space to spin it around. So these front caps here on this particular engine have actually got the thrust surfaces in for the cams, stop the cams from wandering left and right. That's their main job. Front there, rear there, and like the thrust surfaces. It's always good just to inspect. But this is going to go back on the cylinder head once I've removed the head, because you have to remove all of this to get to the head studs. Now that is off. So this car is going to be getting cams and springs as well. Obviously you must make sure that all of the caps go back in onto the same place where they come from. It's very, very, very important. If you don't put them back in the same orientation, then it's line board. So you will have a cam that will eat itself. It's our first camshaft, our inlet camshaft. The reason I cracked them off is because I need to swap them over to the new cams as well. So that one, exhaust side, and they are numbered, I and E on the ends of the cap. Our exhaust cam. Ta-da. Now we are left with push rods, shims, and top of the valve train. Now I can take this bracket off. This has got sealant underneath it as well, so they're sometimes a bit tight. Pull off. Yeah, this is tight. We need to go and get a dead blow hammer for this one. So when removing, again, these have got dowels underneath it and silicone underneath it. And there is the bracket off of that one. So guys, you let me know what you want to know about the GR engines, and I will not hide any information. I will be as honest as I can be with these engines. To share the knowledge about building them, about getting the performance out of them, tips and tricks, and how I approach it. We can share the information, and obviously the platform just grows. Now, a lot of people are tuning these, and a lot of people have had failures, but when you build these things correctly, they are a really great engine. They are the 3 bolts for the front of the cylinder head. You need to make sure that you remove them before removing the cylinder head. Now, a fun bit, you need to count these, because there's 12 rockers, there's 12 roller rockers. These are our roller rockers with a bearing in them. And there is a shim underneath the tip. And then there is a hydraulic lifter in the cylinder head. That's 1, that's 2. The shims and the rockers are identical, and the hydraulic lifters between inlet and exhaust. There's no need to separate and segregate these rockers and lifters and shims. If you were doing solid lifter conversion, which Calford now do for these engines, you would have to manually set the distance for valve clearance. This is my last one. So I now have witnessed that I've got 12 rockers, 12 hydraulic lifters, and 12 shims in this bag. So we're going to move on to the cylinder head now. Now these are pretty damn tight. Reminds me very much like the R35 GTR. When I very first tried to undo them, I was absolutely gobsmacked to see how tight they were, because they were absolutely ridiculous. I'm just checking what size these are. I think they're 12s. Yeah, so it's a 12mm 12-sided socket that you need, and then you need an extension and a 1/2 inch bar. So when you torque a cylinder head up, you torque from the middle out. So you would go diagonal, diagonal, and then work your way from the center out. When you actually untorque a cylinder head, you go the opposite way. So you go outside in. I'm just gonna crack these off before removing the cylinder head. Just need that first little move. And then I will diagonally, and then I'll go across again. You see how tight these are, even with a 1/2 inch bar. Tight, really, really tight. That first little crack on them just releases that torque. And then we go back around them again. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We will not be reusing these bolts. We're going to be putting 625 plus custom age studs and nuts. However, you will find there's two different sizes in this head. The outside studs are thinner than the 4 inner studs. Right, I need to get the washers off of these as well. Now, you shouldn't use magnets on engine components because you don't want to attract any foreign particles on it. But I'm not using these. I'm changing it over to studs and nut though. Even if it gets magnetised, they're not going back in an engine. Right, the cylinder head now is ready to come off. So it didn't take too long to pull this to bit. It takes a lot longer to put them back together again. Ta-da, off. I won't put it on the joint face, I will tip it up. And yeah, lots of oil is going to drain out of this now. So I'm just going to get something to tidy this up. We have our stock head gasket, which has come off this car. It's an MLS 0.7mm, 0.8mm thick MLS gasket, not going to be reused. And now we have our chain sprocket. And then our short block. So I can tip this up now, let everything leak out of it, because there is going to be oil and water trapped in the block. Sometimes these humps can be quite tough to get off. Again, you don't want to be wedging anything underneath that to pry it off, because we have got another joint face here that needs to be flat and sealed and no kind of low spots. Or gouges, that's the worst thing, bloody gouges. The inside of this engine looks really clean actually. It does look really good. It's going to be a great base to start from. Let's get the oil strainer out of it. Guys, if you're looking to have an engine built or if you're looking for parts for your Yaris, the website's nearly there. We've got lots and lots of products, So it'd be good to go onto the SRD Tuning website. Feel free, drop us an email and we'll do everything we can to help you out. Right. Take this lower girdle off now to get to the balance bar. So from a design perspective, what I like about these engines is I like how they've really thought about the construction of the engine, where they're pulling stuff from. So like the head studs go almost all the way to the bottom of the engine into its main cradle. That makes the engine really solid. And then we've got a split crankcase right in half of the crankshaft. So that again adds loads more stiffness to the engine because it's all tied in as one unit. So where on some engines you will have a main cap, this is fully integrated. Now there are two areas to lever this from. Again, I'm not jamming anything into these joint faces. Just tight around the front here, just making sure I haven't missed any bolts. So now I have my screwdriver and go into these access points, split that apart. There we have one, a lower sump, actually it's officially the upper sump. Now we have our balance bar in this engine, which is oil pressure fed. Just check for any backlash in the bar itself, which feels really good. And there are also shims underneath this balance bar to set the gear meshing correctly. If you do any mods to the tunnel in this engine, you'll have to pick the correct shim, because let's say we torque it down with some different main bolts so it gets done up tighter. The hole where the crankshaft goes through and the journals will change shape, so you'll then kind of line bore it, and then if you line bore it and you put the crank in, you put this on, you might find you've loads more clearance on the gear and it will lash. And now this is taking out the secondary imbalance of the engine. Being a 3-cylinder, it needs to have that secondary imbalance taken out to stop the engine from shaking. Now these get done up quite tight. I actually Loctite these on all my race engines because it's one of them components that if it shakes loose, it's game over. Absolutely game over. You know, trash the entire engine. So these get Loctited. those together. And I can't believe it, but I've nearly run out of bags. Brought a fair few down. All of this can go in one bag. That, and the balance bar can come off. And I'll flip it, take the shims off. These shims are really, really important. There's 4 of them, and one of them has got an O-ring because that balance bar is pressure fed for the bushes. So coming back to actually storing all the components for the engine. Now I like to pallet wrap all the larger components. Then you are sure and you know that the engine's only ever got contaminated from the time you've opened it up and the time you're putting it back together again. Now, if I just threw everything in a box, you know, I'll get all the dust and all the crap and all just everything in the stored boxes, the dust and stuff. I don't want to contaminate the engine any more than I have to. Everything, yes, will get cleaned, but I think it's just a really good practice to store everything wrapped up. Also, because it's quite sticky, it actually sticks to each other in the boxes, so there's no chance of dinking any of the surfaces. Now, this is just the extra mile you have to go, really, when building these engines. I segregate the boxes up for stuff that needs cleaning and prepping, and stuff that is going to be reused. So, in total, I think we're going to have maybe six boxes for this whole build going on, which will be, you know, engine bay parts. And I can just put this all in these boxes. Yeah, I know, you know, good builders will do this. Just spend that little bit of extra time. It only takes 10 minutes to do this, but yeah, you're guaranteed not to took any more than you have to. I won't be using that gasket again. Yeah, it is important to do the rocker cover. That's one gasket or one cover you don't want contaminated, because there's lots of tiny holes, like I said, in the spray bars in the top of the rocker cover gasket. So if you're leaving this uncovered for a month whilst you do a build, the likelihood is it's going to fill up with dust and grit, and you'll never be able to clean it out because all of these holes are all so small and such a difficult routing for the oil to go through all the spray bars. So just by covering it, I know now that has only ever been exposed underneath when I took it off, when I put it down on my clean stainless table, and all the time it's in my storage boxes. It is not going to get any more contaminated. Same oil strainer straight into a bag, nice and clean. Chain cam guides all in the bag, nice and clean. So it's just minimizing all of that exposure, and that is how we keep everything all together, keep everything nice and clean. Nothing worse than building engines with everything covered in oil and all dirty. And seal that bag as well. So I am going to continue to wrap everything up. Look at that, lovely and clean. And then it's almost a bit like Christmas. I'm wrapping stuff. Obviously we've got to clean it, but what we do now is this box will go out into the main workshop, and then one by one everything will get cleaned and then go into a clean box and then come back into this room. That's how we kind of cycle through everything, because there is a lot of parts when you take the engines apart, and to be efficient you need to make sure you know exactly where all of them parts are at all times. Get some more sandwich bags because I need to take the cams off. This is when we'll start separating stuff that's going back into the engine and stuff that is going back to field customer, because we want to make sure that everybody gets all of their parts back. Even though some people kind of leave them here, it would be nice just to be like, here's all of your boxes and all of your old parts, please take them with you, because storing them is really difficult, especially when you're going through a quantity of cars. VVTi units off of the cams. Again, these are lumbered A and B. And because I cracked these off, I can spin them out. I don't know what this video is going to be called. It's going to be like something about how not to contaminate engines. I'll put these original stock cams back in the Kelford boxes that the new cams come out of, but they're no longer needed, segregated out of what's going to be needed for this build. Now I need to do something with the cylinder head, which I'm going to just wrap it up for now. But before I wrap it up, I want to put all the caps back on in the right place. And then I can actually put it into storage. Because obviously we need to do cams and springs on this cylinder head and new valve stem seals. That is my inlet to I4. There is arrows as well, so the arrows face the front of the engine. Now what we'll do with this cylinder head is we'll go through washing process and cleaning process, then we'll de-spring it, check all the valves, I'll hand lap the valves in. I won't do any CNC work on this particular head because we know that the engines can do 800 horsepower on a stock cylinder head with no porting. And it is not needed for 400 wheel. You can use a stock cylinder head. The ports are massive on these engines. Now wrapping the cylinder head has done two things. It's protected the joint face of the engine, hiding my workbench because this oil has gone everywhere. It is absolutely disgusting. I'm going to be taking the rods and pistons out of this engine now. And the rods aren't too bad to get out. They're a little bit constrained with space, but not horrendous. Thing that you need to take into consideration when doing this is the bearing numbers on the rod and the bearing numbers in the short block or the main block itself. I'm going to take that cap off, keep that cap for that rod, and then have a look at the bearing. That is our first rod and piston out of the engine. I'm going to put the bearing and the caps straight back in it. Sorry, that's actually number 3, but it's the first one I've taken out. Back round to here, do number 1 next. This is going to be using a Nitto CP rod and piston combo with my special balanced assemblies. You need about 12 grams in the crank on each end to get them right. So look at number 1. I mean, all the bearings out of all of these engines, they've all come out and they're all pretty mint. Some of them are a bit worse for wear. That looks mighty impressive. Now I'm not going to be using any of this. This is all going back to feel. And then I'll record the bearing number once everything's out because I'll do my report. Last little bolts. If you give it, unspin the bolt, not all the way, so you've got like 3 engaged threads, and then give it a tap down, that'll just separate the shells. 2 again. This one has got a lot of oil. That is rods and pistons out of this engine. I've already undone the 12mm M10s all the way around the outside of this girdle. And the last thing to do is to take the crankshaft out. And again, these are really tight. I'm gonna do the same as the cylinder head, work myself outside in. Now the crankshaft spins fine when you just crack them off like that. When you actually undo them, so now I've backed them all off so they're loose, crankshaft, rock solid, cannot spin that at all. So it shows you how much the block is twisting from these main cap bolts. Again, that's what I like about the design of the engine. These go all the way through and then the head studs go all the way through and they're tying it in at the bottom. And look how long that bolt is. And you put that there, it's almost at the bottom of the cylinder. Now there's 2 options with the mains on these engines. There is stock or there is an upgraded stud and nut combo. But when you use the stud and nut combo, because the block twists so much, as you've seen, the crankshaft locks up solid, you actually have to torque them and bore gauge them before you finally assemble it. So you do a dry build first. Now again, there is access points to split the casings. Right, so theoretically, that is half of the girdle. This is the crankshaft, and the last thing to do is my piston squirters, pull them out, and then the block's ready for cleaning and machining. Squirters out of this. I actually delete one of the oil squirters. There's two one side of the cylinder and one the other side of the cylinder. And I believe that the reason they've got so much cooling underneath them is for the stock pistons, because they run a super tight bore clearance, so they need to keep them cool. Having a 1.8 valve bore clearance standard, which is bloody tiny. And then when you build the engines, you increase that to 3.8 valve, so you give it 2 thou extra clearance. Now, if you've got so much oil being squirted from underneath the piston, that can actually make its way into the cylinder. You know, you've got 3 jets blasting oil at the bottom of the piston. With obviously forged pistons, bigger clearance, that oil is going to get into the cylinder up the walls. So I actually delete one, which helps improve oil pressure on the engine for all the mains and the big ends. Reduces some of the cooling effect, but controls the oil underneath the piston, and it stops any smoke. So that's another cool little trick with them. Now I know them inside how, I can just get on and get myself sorted, labelled and bagged and put away. Dunk, dunk. There you go. Right, take my thrust bearings out. There's my thrusts. And then take the shells out and keep them in order. So this engine has got all number 2 bearings in it, in the big ends and the mains. This is our stripped block, studs and stuff to pull out of it, but this is our stripped block ready for cleaning and machining. This is going to be the end of my video for stripping and inspecting GR Yaris engines, and the next video is going to be about assembling it, putting it all together, and then putting it in the car, getting it running and putting it on the dyno. So for part 1 of the strip and build of Phil's GR Yaris, this is it. Phil, hope you like it. And yeah, last thing behind me is just got a bit more cleaning, a bit more wrapping with pallet wrap, a bit more storing of boxes. This is the end result, stripped, cleaned, bag tagged, wrapped up, ready to rock and roll. So from me and all of us here at SRD Tuning, have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.